Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ty, and I will be your moderator for today's program. Are you ready to win the Pay Transparency Era, presented by HR Morning and sponsored by Syndio? Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box in the control panel. If they're regarding the subject being presented, I'll add them to the queue for questions at the end. Now I'd like to introduce your speaker, Nancy Romanishin.
Thanks so much. I'm so excited to be with everybody today, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of these winning strategies with everyone. Thank you so much, HR Morning, for having Cindy join us. So, are you ready to win? I hope you're ready. We're going to try to help you be ready. So, we're going to begin today by talking about some of the different experiences that we at Syndio bring around this topic. So you can see that we work with a lot of leaders in industry, and I'll tell you, they are all working on pay transparency. We are a company that provides software and expertise around pay and managing talent, making sure that it's done fairly and consistently. And so this has been just a huge topic for a lot of our customers. You see me there in the corner. You can look me up. I sit on our strategy team. I have a long background in total rewards from my consulting days, and just am thrilled to be with you today to talk through some of the strategies that we see that are really helping folks in this transparency era. Before we begin, just wanted to highlight that Syndio software, we've been noted as one of the leaders when it comes to workplace equity technology, again, providing that balance of expertise and software to make sure that companies like yours can do this, pay and manage talent fairly and consistently. All right, so we figured we would start first with, what the heck are we talking about when we talk about the pay transparency era? And there's a lot of different dimensions of it. So we're going to go through them just one by one. And the first begins with legislation. I think this is the thing that most of us, we're most familiar with this, right? That first it started with, we obviously have pay equity laws. They've been on the books for a really long time. But a few years back, you started to see the ban on asking salary history. And you started to see this sort of strengthening of the laws, where the laws were really looking to be a little more prescriptive around pay and paying people fairly. And then I think one of the biggest things that really hit and kind of kicked off the transparency component of things was when finally you saw legislation that was requiring you to post ranges in job openings when you were advertising those openings. That really had a ripple effect. A lot of people were kind of shocked around that and scrambling to figure out how they were going to do it and execute on it. And that just has been continuing, where we're seeing firms develop strategies around that. We're going to talk about that a little bit more today. But then the other really big thing that hit, and that's where these waves have become kind of a tsunami, is the EU Pay Transparency Directive. So this is impacting all of the member states or countries that are in the European Union, but because there's such a huge amount of people and so many companies that even if you're US headquartered, you may have a lot of folks there, or at least you're competing with other companies that have a lot of folks in the EU. It's having this impact globally. It's requiring pay equity analysis to be run and that you demonstrate that you do that. It's requiring disclosures of pay gaps. It's requiring pay transparency and career transparency. So it's so many requirements for each of those member states, those countries to transpose. And that's what's happening right now. Each of them has to adopt that legislation, but even more, each of them have their own legislation. So this is the floor. They're adding things as they go. So it's really, again, having this ripple effect on how we pay and manage talent. And then you can also see on this slide, there's been an awful lot of legislation. So litigation rather. So as things become more transparent, you're seeing more and more folks saying, hey, I'm not being paid fairly. And of course, it's the biggest companies that are going to get the headlines. And we're just seeing this continue. But another dimension is we have other stakeholders, and this is what we're seeing from investors. So companies have investors and boards that are looking to say, what are you doing, company, to make sure that you're managing your talent fairly, consistently, so that you're not exposing the company to risk, and you're doing it in a way that will continue to attract, retain, and engage employees for the long-term value that you're bringing as an organization. I'm investing in you. I want to make sure that you are engaged in good, solid business practices. So you're seeing investors like Arjuna. So Arjuna has been pretty vocal for quite a few years now around having companies disclose their adjusted, that's pay equity, and unadjusted raw pay gap. So basically, they want to be able to have their investments, these companies say what they're doing and how they're making sure that they're paying different groups of people, and they're often focused on gender. Here you can see it's also race and ethnicity, around making sure that people are being paid fairly across the board and that they're being promoted fairly. So Arjuna has a scorecard that they've come out with. I think this past year's was the seventh scorecard. One of the big hits of the scorecard was the fact that they drastically increased the list of companies that they were scoring. They score them across a bunch of different dimensions, but it's really about what are you disclosing, not how well you're doing, but are you disclosing things like your pay gap, like representation? So they're really trying to make a splash and make a point around the fact that companies need to be much more transparent. The other dimension of this that's really interesting is this aspect of, um, investment groups, or advisory groups like ISS Corporate coming out and saying, companies are disclosing that they run pay equity analyses, that they have a rigorous process associated with it, and that actually that is helping them demonstrate that they are a good investment. So that has really been a change from years past when we used to be very quiet and we weren't going to talk about these pay equity analyses. Now it's something that if you're not talking about it, you better, because otherwise people are going to fill in with bad news versus good news. But finally, I would say, the biggest group of people that are having the greatest impact are employees. So this is a great example of a tweet that went viral last year. And we know that there's more to the story here. But what's fascinating is just how this kind of information goes viral quickly. Employees have a lot more information about how they're paid. They're able to do their own research. And that's what this statistic from Gartner is demonstrating, that, and I have a feeling it's higher even than that. But more and more employees are saying, I've done the research, I've looked online, I can see the job postings, I know what I'm supposed to be paid, why aren't I paid that? And employers are really having to make sure that they can be crisp and clear about what are the things that we value at this organization, why is Nancy paid what Nancy is paid, and how can Nancy advance? So these are the things that we're hearing a lot of employers have strategies or building strategies around how they're going to address these issues. Which kind of brings us to this next trend. I would say, if we think about what's ahead, it's not an if, but a when. Most companies we're talking with, have made the decision that there's just too much legislation. There are too many things that they need to take care of. They can't do sort of a patchwork approach and only post ranges over here and not post ranges over there. So we're seeing more and more companies are making this decision around a global approach. They may do things somewhat differently in different jurisdictions, but for the most part, they want to be prepared for these trends, that there's only going to be more transparency, that other companies are sharing information about pay and benefits, so they better be prepared to do it too. Oops. Oh dear. It looks like my My presentation came alive there for a minute, probably me gesturing too much. Um, and so they want to, and they know that employees are talking and sharing, so they want to be prepared for that. What we have here is a guide that we have been able to put together around some of those trends that I was just talking about. So please feel free. That's what that QR code is all about. You can click on it and check out our guide on our website, and we can always share that after. So let's talk about some of the winning strategies. These are the things that we're seeing folks do. So one is thinking bigger than compliance. Again, kind of building on what I was saying before, we are tempted to think about this from, well, we have to do this over here in this state. We have to do this over here in this state. Companies that are successful are really leaning in and saying, let's zoom out. Let's think about the employee value proposition. Let's think about what we need to do and where, and then come up with a consistent strategy that makes sense for how we're going to do it. And we'll have more on that in a second. They're also thinking bigger than pay. So it's tempting to focus just on pay. I only have to post that pay range. That's really all I have to do, right? But they know that it's really pay as an outcome of talent management. There are other issues at the heart of why someone is paid what they're paid. And so they're running analyses to really address some of these other root causes of pay outcomes as a preparation for pay transparency. And then it's about thinking bigger than today. And by that, what we mean is pay transparency is changing the way we do things. We have to change. So companies are coming up with new strategies around how pay and talent management decisions are made consistently and fairly, and how they can scale that across their organizations. So let's talk about compliance for a second. So one of the winning strategies is really, using it, as we're saying, a foundation for your transparency strategy. One of the things we advise is first beginning with an assessment. Start by plotting out where you have employees, and I'm sure a lot of you have already been doing this, right? Where do we have concentrations of employees? Where are we hitting the thresholds for some of those reporting requirements, for example, around the world? And then also compare what are we sharing with employees today and where do we think we're going to have some of these gaps? We're going to have to educate employees, for example, that we have geographic differentials. That's something that's come out of some of the recent years of pay transparency for some companies. They weren't maybe as formal about it. Maybe they didn't tell Nancy, who was in Idaho, that if she was working in Chicago, she'd be making more money. So that's something that they've had to come out with and then explain the rationale. And the great thing is employees are ready to hear it. They're already researching it. They already kind of know. So this way you're saying to them, hey, we have some intentionality around how we're doing this. We want to share that with you. And that's a good thing. And that goes to that, creating sort of this holistic set of messaging, making sure that you're looking at your total rewards philosophy, you're looking at the things that you're already communicating and seeing where you can sort of marry up some of that more detailed messaging that you're creating. So pro tip, and I have a couple of these on these slides. Companies are actually able to use software for this. So as you can imagine, Syndio, for example, has software that can help you manage the reporting, the thresholds, and just keeping up with those requirements and scaling those communications. That's one way that a lot of firms are kind of pulling together a lot of maybe the different efforts that are happening in different parts of their organizations and coming up with something that's more streamlined, more in that way it can be more consistent and more efficient in the end. Thinking bigger than pay. This is another big one. And I think this has been something, again, that we have observed that there have been a lot of different efforts around different companies where they're maybe doing different types of analyses, but not really bringing it together. Pay transparency is really helping bring that together. So one of the things we talk about is putting the employee at the center of it. Can you think like an employee about why am I paid what I'm paid? How can I make more money? That's right, always a big question. being able to explain things like the differences in pay between certain jobs. The differences in pay, I think we oftentimes think about immediately, well, I need to be able to explain the differences in pay between people doing the same job. Nancy and Heather are doing the same job, but they're paid very differently. Well, Heather has a better skill set that is more attuned to what we value as an organization. So that's why Heather's making more than Nancy. But Nancy, if you want to acquire that skill set, you can make more. I think one of the big things that's coming out of pay transparency that we kind of forget and have to remember is employees are finding out the differences in pay between different jobs in a way that they didn't know before. So, for a lot of us that have worked in human resources for some time, I think we become desensitized. We forget how much we know about how much data scientists make, for instance, in comparison to, say, other roles. So these are things that are new for a lot of employees, and they're starting to put all that together to realize, oh, wow, I didn't know if I worked in that part of the organization, I could make a lot more money. That puts a lot of pressure, I think, on employers now when it comes to posting internal roles, movement, making sure that people that are over here with this skill set have that opportunity to get that skill set so they can be over here and making more money. So what we're seeing is a lot of companies are pulling together data, but they're also bringing together a multidisciplinary team, our learning and development team, as well as total rewards, as well as our HR business partners, in order to say, let's conduct pay equity analysis, performance analysis, promotions analysis to really understand how employees move through the employee life cycle. What are the different decision points, and how are those all coming together for the outcomes that our employees pay? So, that sort of integration, again, is something that has been a challenge, I think, in the past, especially when you have different teams responsible for different elements of that information. But we're seeing there is that pressure. And going back and remembering again that EU pay transparency directive that I mentioned, that actually includes benefits. So, one of the things that companies are going to have to disclose and analyze is how even pay plus benefits play out across different employee populations. So understanding all of those inputs, bringing all that data together is really critical to preparing for this new transparency era. And of course, another pro tip. What we're seeing is companies are bringing all that information together in software. So a lot of times, your HRMs or HRIS, those systems don't have that ability to kind of show this level of visibility and some of the analytics that you need to really have that make those decisions around pay and the adjustments in the aggregate. Over to the right here, we have just show some summary analytics. And these are the types of things that, for instance, our customers are able to do where they're able to run some of those more macro analyses and then have the visualization to prioritize what are the hot spots. What are some of the specific programs and things that are in effect and really pressuring different areas of the business and making them, maybe they're having some of those inequities, driving some of those inequities. For example, we have a customer that was able to run some analytics and really very quickly was able to identify that they had one geographic area that they thought they were paying in the way that they had planned, in the way they had set up their geographic structures, and that wasn't what was working out. And so what it did was, by running analytics like this, they were able to surface those insights pretty quickly. They could see that these were, where they had outliers, these were the employees that it was this particular cluster. And then they were able to, and right now what they're doing is really looking into, is it a market issue? Should we do some more market analysis? Is there something else special going on with this group of employees in this specific location? How then should we coach the business leader, right, for that segment of the business in that location? So it's all of those things kind of coming together. That's what a lot of human resources teams are looking to do by pulling all of the data together and running some of these analytics in software. And finally, it's really about thinking bigger than today. And by that, it is just taking a step back and acknowledging that pay transparency really is changing human resources. So we're seeing that companies are, number one, trying to meet the moment with some of those analytics and things that I was talking about on those earlier slides. But at the same time, they need to scale better decision making. And so, how are they doing it? One of the things that they're doing is, again, pulling together, you've heard me say, cross-disciplinary, teams, interdisciplinary teams. So it's taking some of these analytics out of, kind of the black box, right? And somewhere where we're running these things in the background and showing things in sort of a static way to only certain groups, and saying, how can we bring teams together in a more robust way? One of the things we're seeing really emerge is transparency getting on the level of being a strategic imperative across a company. Heads of human resources, heads of total rewards are putting together teams that are global, and they're creating different work streams as part of their process. They're saying that, okay, we have to make sure that we're being compliant, so we're going to pull together these different teams. We know that we have different folks in different areas of our organization around the world that typically are in charge of compliance reporting. That's the team that's we're going to pull together for that. Here's the team that our talent acquisition organization, let's pull in some of the leaders of talent acquisition just so that we have an understanding of what data they're using to make pay decisions in what areas of the organization. What are some of the things that they're facing on the ground? How are you communicating? How are you communicating? And bringing that together too and integrating those processes. They're looking at the analytics component of it. So usually, for instance, we typically would run pay equity analysis, and that would be something that would be more of an audit. We'd run it in the background, and then maybe we would inform, we would tell HR business partners, hey, can you coach this business leader around these few folks? They're not paid fairly, or maybe we don't even say that. Just we do a wink and a nudge. We're not going to really talk about it, but yeah, there's a spotlight on some of those folks. They're going to need more than their typical merit increase. Now we're at a time where, what if we did it in a much more proactive way? What if, just like we do with market analysis, and we're so transparent around, well, we analyze the market, we pull together and aggregate that information, and we come up with a range that is competitive. What if we also have a range that is equitable? And that's based on our internal pay equity analysis. So that's what you're seeing over to the right here, where companies are bringing those two things together. And they're making sure that now I have the benefit of what's externally competitive, what's internally equitable, and I can make an offer. I can make, a promotion offer, but this way I'm armed with more of that information, and I'm going to hone in on and be much more practical in what we're offering. That means less negotiation. It's really going forward with, hey, candidate, or hey, employee getting promoted, this is the recommended range, and this is based on not just what's competitive, but what we typically pay folks with your similar characteristics. For instance, if you're managing people and you have your level of experience and you happen to be working in what we're calling Geo Zone 2, which might be a certain particular set of locations or market, this is what the equitable pay range is. So we featured this case study. This is something one of our customers, Elevance Health, put this into practice across their organization. They had a very high volume of hiring. And one of the struggles was they had a CHRO and leadership team that's very committed to pay equity. They really wanted to solve pay equity. And they recognized that we really shouldn't be paying inequitably. We don't design programs to be inequitable. We design them to be fair. We use data. So why is this happening? And they know it's just because people don't have all the information they need to make the right decision. So here what they did was they rolled out a new program. They piloted a software that Syndio's Payfinder software to first begin to work with a group of the talent acquisition team for certain jobs to test out and embed in a new workflow, making those pay decisions using the benefit of that software and that guidance. It took a little time just to implement and kind of learn from one another. And what they found was it just made for such a better relationship between total rewards and talent acquisition. They were much closer. They were able to ask each other questions and provide better guidance. And then these folks were able to roll it out even more so. And they had, situations where, for example, one member of the talent acquisition team was trying to encourage their leader to pay within this range, the equitable range. And the leader, and at first, they didn't have the benefit of, say, something like this where they could show them. So they were telling them, and the leader was very reluctant. They're like, no, I have to pay the top of the range. I really need this person. So then they were able to bring in some of these visuals like this to explain, okay, that's fine. Obviously, you are the business leader, but understand it's likely going to have this ripple effect. We're going to have to make some corrections go forward later on because that's just not how we're paying people in practice. And it changed that leader's mind. They were able to understand and integrate and understand through the bigger context of the business what was going to be the right decision. And so they were able to hire that candidate. And what was interesting with this case study was some of the surprises because we expected and found, right, that they saved money by better adhering to their pay policies, right? They were able to have situations like that where they weren't going so far above what was recommended. And it ended up saving them money, both, as they're hiring people and bringing people in, but also in terms of when they ran their next pay equity analysis, they had a great reduction in cost. But the other thing was they had surprises around, they were thinking, oh, we're adding something to the process. Is this going to create a problem with filling positions, with applicants taking positions? And it had the opposite effect. It actually reduced time to fill. It actually increased the rate at which applicants were accepting positions. So again, if we think about this broader context of pay transparency, well, of course, employees, prospects, candidates, they're going to expect that greater transparency, and knowing that your organization has that level of commitment to making sure that you're valuing and paying people fairly and consistently, that's huge. That's really important. So this is, again, pro tip. It is really helpful having the benefit of both your internal pay equity analysis, combining it with your traditional compensation analysis, compensation guidance, because it really does have some great results. All right. So I hope I've shared some things to help you be ready to win, but we have some more to share here as well. So you are free to use this QR code to access. We have an assessment. What we found was a lot of times, again, companies are trying to figure out, what do I prioritize? What do I want to make sure that I'm doing first in terms of addressing transparency overall? So we have some different dimensions that we've outlined here around pay transparency, promotion transparency, I would say career, communicating, and compliance and reporting. And our assessment asks some questions of you around your processes and some of the things that you're doing around this. I'd encourage you to take this, and if perhaps you can't answer all the questions, maybe invite some of your colleagues that you think might know into helping you complete it. We have an assessment. We'll be able to give you the benefit of the, sort of do a quick analysis for you and provide you some guidance that we think would be helpful as you think about how you're going to prioritize, how you're addressing some of these different things. So I think I spoke very quickly because I tend to fly through things quickly. So Would love to take some questions if we have some questions. I'm going to check. Um, Happy to open it up to folks. And I do thank you for your time today.
All right, I saw someone raise their hand, so I just want to make sure that they don't have that they have a question coming in, but if that's not the case, if a question arises afterwards, you can reach out to us and we'll provide yeah, I see someone's raising their hand again. If you could please put your question in the question box, uh, we will get to all of them in the order that they're received. Okay, well, it doesn't look like any questions came in. So I'll pass it back to you, Nancy, for any closing remarks. And again, we will respond to your questions if you have any, after the fact, after you've digested this information, we'll get back to you in a timely manner.
Absolutely. Well, I hope I didn't talk too fast, but um, I'm hoping people feel empowered to address pay transparency. One thing I would say is it is a continually changing landscape. There is no right answer. There's more around your processes and making sure that you're thinking in that broader context, putting your employees at the center and thinking about how being more transparent about how you make pay decisions, in addition to the information around pay and promotions, um, how that is landing with your employees, I think is really critical. So, and that's what we're seeing companies do. And it may be also incremental. Most companies don't begin by being completely transparent about everything. So many companies are aligning some of their efforts to do some additional education to dig in and maybe prepare their employees for the fact that they're going to be posting ranges for the first time, for instance, in Illinois or Minnesota. And what they do is they're leveraging their annual compensation planning process. So we're already talking about pay. We're bringing out and reminding people of the guidance that we provide and the way we think about this. That's not changing, but here we have some additional information we can share. And that's what we're seeing a lot of folks use is sort of that strategy of having, what scaffolding do you have in terms of the frameworks you use already to make these decisions? And then how can you build on that to bring your employees more and more into that conversation over time? As you heard, we're really happy to talk with you about it. And I hope the assessment gets you maybe started on it if you haven't started on it, or maybe it's a good opportunity for you to kind of take a minute and assess how you've been doing and what are some of those priorities you have and how does that align with some of the recommendations based on the work we've been doing with all those companies. With that, though, I'm happy to give people the gift of time. I know we could all use it, and it's just been a pleasure having this opportunity, and I thank HR Morning for it.
And thank you, Nancy. And again, please feel free to reach out if you have questions after you've digested this information. So with that, on behalf of HR Morning, I would also like to thank everyone for attending. This concludes our program.